Welcome to thefogvlog.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of MixHax. And if you didn't watch the Easy Does It episode earlier this week, Happy New Year and welcome back. You know, we are a little bit rusty. Liam is here. So welcome, Liam. Thank you for joining. Today, we are talking about mixing safety. So an easy topic for us to kick off the new year with, but I think there's a lot to be said around this topic. Quite interesting, actually. I read a couple of things about it online, and there's a couple of sort of high-level things that I just want to throw out there and see what everybody else is doing here with these things. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to know from you guys is, of course, with these kits that especially new mixers buy, they normally sold with gloves, right? However, and personally, I don't actually use them. Normally, these kits are sold with 36 milligram nicotine here in South Africa. I'm not sure everywhere else, but from the research that I've done, it seems like you're okay. For small little spills, for anything under 60 milligrams. Do you guys use gloves? Do you think it's necessary?
I've used gloves. I've used gloves before, meaning when I started and I bought a starter kit, I had gloves, so I used them. I was actually very paranoid about the nicotine because I heard lots of stories about people spilling some and then going to hospital and getting an injection for poisoning and whatnot. I used them a couple of times. I actually bought a second pair and used it. And then as soon as I found something better, which was just decanting my nicotine into a PET bottle, this is not my nicotine, this is just a juice. But if you get a PET bottle with a nice small nozzle like that, then there's really, really not much chance you're going to spill. And if you spill, it's going to be maybe a drop, which you can quickly wipe off. So I would say gloves necessary if you're working with 100 milligram nicotine or heavy nic salts or something and you're messy and might spill. But if you've got it in a normal container with a nice little fine tip, then the chances of messing is not going to be that much. That's my experience with gloves.
Yeah, for me, it's the same as Deets. I actually started off using gloves because, again, I read everything about how dangerous it'll be and everything else. So I started off with gloves. But what I found was, because I store my nicotine in the fridge, when I had gloves on, the bottle started to get quite slippery in those gloves. So there was more chance of me actually dropping and smashing the bottle than if I didn't use the gloves in the first place. So I then started exactly the same as Deets, just decanting into a 30ml PET bottle or a 60ml bottle just for my working nicotine, or alternatively use a 14 or a 16 gauge blunt syringe and just syringing it up and measuring it that way, straight from the nicotine bottle. And that way then I don't actually spill anything, and anything that is spilled is literally one, maybe two drops, which I just wipe up straight away and just wash my hands after I've handled the nicotine, that's all.
I think the key safety issue is what others have said, and that is to decant. I mean, I put my neck in one of these. I can literally hold this against the wall. Maybe two drops are going to come out. You're asking for trouble when you use the retail bottle, the glass bottle with the open neck and the cap that comes, because when that happens, you put that down on the desk, the cap's open because you want to use your pipette or whatever to get it out, and then you bump it over, and then neck runs all over the desk, and then you've got a problem. If you decant, you really preclude the use of gloves. Although one thing, just for people to be aware of, we did hear an anecdote of a guy who ordered a bottle of Nic. En route to him, via the courier, the parcel got banged around, the bottle of Nic broke, and he reached into the parcel, and of course, because Nic doesn't have a very strong aroma, he didn't sense that anything was wrong. So he reached into the box of goodies and came out with his hand totally soaked in neck, which wasn't, I mean, he just got a mild neck buzz from it. He washed it off immediately and just got a mild neck buzz. But, even though you don't have to wear gloves, just be careful. Look in your box from the courier before you, just put your hand in. Accidents happen, bottles can break en route, or the cap can come off or whatever. So, be careful about it, but it's not something that you need to get paranoid about and stay away from DIY because there's a chance you can get neck poisoning. Really, hundreds of thousands, maybe even 1 million plus people are DIYing around the world. If it was that dangerous, we would have heard media reports by now of people being hospitalized and so on. And there have been 1 or 2 cases, but really they were such extreme examples that to put that forward as an everyday danger for DIY is just alarmist. It really isn't that dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, some of the some of the suppliers are now shipping, of course, 100 milligram nic, and some of the bottles that we are getting from those suppliers don't have any child safety on them. So, just also be careful with that. I've got 1 or 2 bottles, 100 milligrams, and no child safety on it. Not that I have a child running around here, but generally if you do, just be super careful, especially if it's in the fridge. That's, I think, what you need to look out for. And then another thing I saw in some of these DIY kits and people recommending that you get when you start mixing is safety goggles. So I'm not 100% sure how messy shit gets, but you know what I mean? Is this necessary?
Liam and I are in the pound seats here because we've got our safety goggles on already. No, I mean, if you wear glasses,
Just on the issue of the child safety caps, what I do with my nicotine when it's in the fridge or in the freezer, I actually went and bought a large cash box because I've got a little boy who will actually get into everything if I'm not careful. So I went and bought a large cash box that I actually store. It'll hold 5 or 6 100 milliliter bottles in there. So I put that in there, lock it away, and then I've got the key on me so that even if he does get into the freezer or the fridge, he can get into where the nicotine is.
Yeah, that's clever.
Yeah, I have something similar. You guys have seen my daughter in and around a few times. Now with her, for me, what I did was I decant into the bottle I use, normally a 30 ml or 50 ml, depending on how much I'm going to mix. And then I take the bottle, place it into another mason jar because I like the idea of glass. And I think that idea actually started when I decanted everything into a 100 ml plastic bottle and put that into the fridge, and later realized that the nicotine, after, if you leave it a very, very long time, I think I had it about 6 months at that time, it looked like it was starting to wear on the bottle. So I figured if a plastic bottle breaks in my fridge, it's not a good idea. So later bottles of nic and everything I decant. So I'll keep the original bottle in a big mason jar, and then anything that's left from the decanted small bottles will go into the mason jar with that. That has a lid on that goes on very tightly. And then first I explained to my daughter, this is the jar you never ever touch. And then you place it in the top shelf of the fridge at the back. It's just safety. I mean, it makes sense. That should be your normal nicotine practice. From the fridge to where you work, from where you work back to the fridge. And obviously, if you're putting it in the fridge, even if there's no kids, you need to have it either labeled or safely, clearly put into something to kind of give attention. You never know. There's a stranger who might be feeling for some weird-looking liquid and then take a sip. Some drunk people might,
I think it's eye drops or something.
Excuse me.
Also on the issue of decanting, it's a good idea if you buy a 100 ml bottle, decant it into 30 ml PET bottles. And you fill them up and cap them, and then you've got minimum oxygen coming into contact with your nick, you keep those, the 30 ml PET bottles that you haven't used, you keep those in the freezer or the fridge or whatever. So you've got them at low temperature, minimum oxidation. Your nick's going to last longer. It's not going to spoil as easily. So you use your, you decant your 100 ml into, say, 4 times 30 ml. And you just, keeping it safe from oxidation, keeping it safe from spoiling. So it's generally a good idea to decant anyway.
Another thing that happened to me that I think is pretty relevant. Now, starting out DIY, there wasn't a lot of good information out there, especially calculators. There's a lot more calculators and stuff out there now. But, you have to be pretty sure of the amount of nick that you're going to be using, especially if you're starting out, because otherwise you could mix yourself up a fairly, poisonous dose. Poison is not the right word really, but you can go really too high. Or, there's another thing you need to do. You need to clearly mark out, especially if you decant your nicotine, what's nicotine and what's PG, because if your nicotine is as clear as your PG and you swap those accidentally, you've got a very high dosage of nicotine. Surely you're gonna notice on the first hit that, wow, that's super high. But what happened with me is exactly that. I was mixing up, and it was just my computer light that I had on my desk. I swapped things around, but when I had the first hit, and this was of a dual coil, coughed my lungs out, but I didn't just get a buzz. I got a 100% sort of nauseating headache thing, and that was my, if you want to call it poisoning. That's probably as bad as it's going to get if you have too much nick in your vape
and alcohol in your system. Come on, be honest. You had beers and then you mixed, and then that's the mistake you made.
Could be.
But then the other thing as well, if you work with different nicks, be very careful. You've got 100 ml and or 100 milligram and 36 milligram, both in your recipe app and in your actual mixing. Just that you don't mix the two up, because what can happen, you mixing in your recipe app, you assign the 36 milligram nick and you get, add X amount of 36 milligram nick. You grab the 100 milligram nick by accident. Now you're adding, 2.5 times as much nick as you need. And you're working very safely and carefully, but you've got your wires crossed. What I tend to do is that I only work with one nick at a time. If I get 100 milligram and I get a 36 milligram, I'll finish the 100 milligram and then start on the 36, or vice versa. So at any one time, I know exactly the nick that I'm working with, and it then becomes very easy just to double check on my mixing app, add on the bottle that I take out of the fridge. I'll put the bottle that I'm not using in the freezer. The bottle that I'm using currently, I'll keep that in the fridge, so I know exactly what nick I'm using at each time. And then, of course, to label them carefully as well.
That happened to me. I've always been mixing with a 36 milligram nicotine until Black Flavor brought out the 48 milligram gold nick. So I still had the 36 loaded, and I threw the amount for 36 milligram, which obviously is in volume more than the 48 milligram. Doesn't sound like much of a difference, but that was a killer juice, and also was noticed on the first inhale. It makes quite a big difference. I mean, just mixing up a 36 and a 48 milligram nick. So that is a very good, very valid point.
Yeah, and then, one thing that I think, should be avoided and, can be avoided by skipping syringes, from the start, just going by decanting your nicotine and using a scale, is syringes with needles. Now, some of the bottles that you get with concentrate in, it's difficult to get to the bottom of that bottle without a needle, and as soon as you start using needles, or you have them, there's a pile of things that you need to be aware of by, like making sure that they are clean, even the syringes, you have to wash the syringes and stuff the whole time. I guess that goes, into the next topic as well, which we want to talk about, and that's just the whole myth around how dangerous DIY is. I haven't specifically heard of any cases where somebody got poisoned. I'm not sure if you guys have. The term bathtub, if you want to call it that. I know it's not what we want to call DIY juice, but it is a term that is being used. But I haven't really heard of anybody getting sick. There has been cases, though, of people reporting getting sick from clone juices. And when I say clone, it's clones that is imported from China, that is cloning or replicating an international juice, for instance. I've heard people saying, hey, they've gotten some mild nausea or headache cases. I think somebody got hospitalized as well. What have you guys heard? What do you guys think?
The big problem there seems to be the quality of the PG and the VG. You can get industrial grade PG, which is not good to vape. And this is where, don't cut corners in DIY. It's cheap enough as it is. If one of your mates who works in a factory says, don't buy PG from the DIY place, we use it at work, I'll bring you a 5-gallon drum of it, you just give me a $5 and that's fine. Yeah, that might not be pharmacological grade PG. That could be industrial grade PG, and it's going to vape terribly. It's going to be harsh, you're going to cough from it, etc., etc. PG and VG are dirt cheap. Buy the proper stuff, the USP or BP grade, the proper pharmacological grade PG and VG. If you're working with syringes, for heaven's sakes, assign a different syringe to each flavor. People want to cut corners, and now they're making a mix, and they've got one syringe for all their flavors. So they draw a little bit of Flavora-rich cinnamon out, pop that into their mix, and without rinsing the syringe, they now go and draw out their vanilla bean ice cream or whatever. And then they wonder why, for the rest of eternity, that vanilla bean ice cream has got a strong cinnamon tinge to it. It's because you used the same syringe that you used in your Flavora-rich cinnamon. Use a different syringe for every flavor. But you shouldn't be doing that anyway. I mean, you get your 10 ml or whatever PET or HDPE dropper, and you use that. You shouldn't be needing to use syringes, with the standard DIY dropper bottles that you get from them.
I think the bathtub thing came from the syringes. I mean, I had some pretty conservative family over when I started DIYing, and I mean, to me, it's a hobby, and this is what I do. I don't see any negative things around it. And then you get people who don't vape from outside. They walk into your house, and to them, it seems like some sort of a lab. I mean, you got bottles and decanters and syringes and a bunch of weird-looking stuff. And now there's I mean, people wonder. So you've got to educate them. No, this is vape liquid and all of that. So I just think it's the whole syringe thing. I don't agree with. I cannot agree with it. I mean, get a scale and use your dropper bottles. They sell them in a dropper bottle for a reason. It's more accurate, and there's just so many reasons why not to use a scale. I mean, if you're going to decant, if you're going to use a syringe, it means you're probably working with a concentrate bottle that has an open neck. And I wanted to mention that on nicotine topic as well. Anything in my mind, that's why the decanting nicotine makes sense, because you decant it, you close it, and it's sealed. Where you're mixing, I'm not saying everyone is mixing in a dusty farm barn or something, but if you're sitting your nicotine on your desk, there's dust and stuff blowing around, it's an open bottle, and you're sitting there mixing for what? Let's say I normally mix for a minimum of an hour to 2 hours. So it's quite some time for stuff to fall in there and contaminate the concentrates and the nicotine. Don't use syringes. It gives everything a bathtub feel. Don't do it. There's no such thing as bathtub liquid. I think it's mainly the as Richard mentioned, it's the quality of the PG and the VG and the mass production of it.
And also, just in terms of general hygiene, the golden rule I apply is whatever I do in the kitchen, I do when mixing. you don't mix on a dusty surface, just the same as you don't prepare food on a dusty surface or a dirty surface. So just wipe the surface, wash your hands. Don't have the dog or the cat sitting on the table while you mixing. It's just, this is basic primary hygiene. It's not something that you need to be excessively paranoid about in mixing. Just apply the same principles as you would in the kitchen, and then you'll be okay. And that comes down to things as well, like washing your bottles properly. Rinse them out properly. Make sure that they're fully dry before you mix them, etc., etc. Just basic hygiene 101.
Took the words right out. Took the words right out of my mouth then, Rich. That's exactly what I was going to say. When mixing for yourself, just mix as you would when you're cooking. Just make sure everything is clean, hygienic, and keep an eye on that nicotine as well. Just make sure that you are putting in the right amounts. Because I think that might be some of the problem with the counterfeit juices that you touched on, Theo, was they might be labelled a 3 milligram, but you don't necessarily know that they got 3 milligram in them. They might have 6, 10, 12, which may end up making you sick, which is the headache and nausea.
I mean, just thinking about it, as the quality of the VG and PG can be bad, the quality of nicotine they use can be some horrendous quality of nicotine, and that can definitely make you sick. I mean, I can imagine that. Nicotine is, there's a substance in the suspended PG or VG, depending on your base that you're using. So it's not just the base that is of low quality, it's the actual molecule of the active ingredient.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, there are possibly bad batches of nic where, the guy who's making the counterfeit juice has a buddy who works at the nic factory, and the nic factory was going to toss out, 300 liters of juice because the batch went bad, it was left in the sun or whatever. And now there's backyard, envelopes change hands, and suddenly that nic ends up, dirt cheap nic ends up in the hands of somebody who's making counterfeit juice. And it's not fit for consumption. So, yeah, there are problems there, but that is in the counterfeit area. If you are in DIY and you buy from reputable vendors, if there's any problem with your nic or whatever, you send it straight back to them, and you get them to test it and to replace it. If it's bad, you buy your flavors from reputable vendors. You make sure that your PG and VG has got the proper BP or USP grading to it. Basic hygiene, and then you'll be fine.
You're good to go. Guys, is there anything more that we want to add to this topic? I'm not sure if I've left something out.
Yeah, I was just thinking now that I should have mentioned when mixing with VG-based nicotine is to make sure you really give it a really good shake. Shake it as if it owes you money. Because otherwise you might end up with hot spots, so concentrated pockets of nicotine within that. So even though you might measure it absolutely perfectly, you think you're putting in 1.5, 3 milligram, you could be putting in as much as 50 milligram. Yeah. So as long as you give a really good shake, and the same goes for PG, but with VG it's a lot more important because it's a lot thicker.
Cool, guys. So thank you very much for watching the show, guys. If there's anything that we've left out from a safety perspective, please add it in the comments below. If there's anything that we actually didn't touch on, or you've got any questions, leave those in the comments below. But thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, guys.